students. Again, I welcome you all for the online classes of Triveni Memorial Senior Secondary School. And today, through this video, I'm going to explain you the poem Keeping Quiet, written by Pablo Neruda. And this poem is from the book Flamingo, Class 12. Now, before starting with the explanation, let's talk about the poet. Pablo Neruda, born on 12 July 1904 and he passed away on 23rd September 1973, wrote in a variety of styles including surrealist poems, historical epics, overly political manifestos, a prose autobiography, and passionate love poems such as the ones in his collection 20 Love Poems and A Song of Despair. Neruda won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. Pablo Neruda is one of the most influential and widely read 20th century poets of the Americas. No writer of world renown is perhaps so little known to North Americans as Chilean poet Pablo Neruda. Observe New York Times book review critic Sheldon Rodman. Numerous critics have praised Neruda as the greatest poet writing in the Spanish language during his lifetime. John Leonard in the New York Times declared that Neruda was, I think, one of the great ones, a Whitman of the South. Among contemporary readers in the United States, he is largely remembered for his sides, means that is the odes and love poems. Theme of the poem. Keeping Quiet is a simple poem about the need for a little bit of soul searching which may help us to make peace with ourselves and others. It tells us how a moment of silent introspection will make us realize the utter futility of our aggressive endeavor. Introduction. Now, Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda is a powerful piece of poetry penned by a poet in favor of peace, humanity, and self-actualization. We live in troubled time these days in which our utilitarian take on life has not just divorced us from the fellow human beings but also from our own selves. We have nations embroiled in power strugglers with which each other and humans who are so busy trying to attain the superficial goals in life that they have no comprehensive ideas of who they really are as an individual. This is the reason why we have so much chaos on a societal level and depression on an individual level. The poet provides us with a very simple solution in the poem to help us combat all of these problems. This solution lies in keeping quiet. Now, before starting with the explanation, let's talk about the poetic device used in the poem. The first poetic device which is used in this poem is alliteration. Alliteration is a string of 3 or 4 instances of the same consonant sound with no more than one intervening, no alternative onset consonant sound, and alliteration is used as the mnemonic device to evoke feelings such as fear and suspense in poetry. For example, we will, we would, once own, we would, and that is his hand, hurt hand. Now, antithesis. Antithesis is a use of contrasting concepts word of sentences within parallel grammatical structures. Count to 12 and we will all keep still. Repetition. Repetition often uses words association to express ideas and emotions in an indirect manner. putting emphasis on a point, confirming an idea, and describing a notion, without rush, without engine. Imagery. Imagery is based on our five senses. Though visual imagery is used the most, the images contribute to a poem's meaning, cold sea. Now let's begin with the first stanza. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. Now here, poet Pablo Neruda wants to say that by asking the reader to count to 12, the poet calls for a time to be tranquil and unmoving. His use of the number 12 could be associated to the clock hours or possibly even the numbers of month in a year. Both attributions, however, effectively depict how our hours and months pass by before us, as we continue to chase after them without so much as a pause in between. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's not speak means let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. Again, the poet reinforces his call not to take a step further, move nor speak. The appeal to not speak in any language is symbolic of asking people to now speak in one language, that is the silence. This would bring everyone together and lead us to the introspection. In this view, symbolism may also be seen in the use of phrase move our arms so much, which in this context, if taken lightly, can be considered as merely brisk walking, but could also be signifying violence or our selfish pursuits. It is to be noted as well how the poet mentions once and 1 second. In this stanza, this appeal is set on the premises that humans are constantly speaking and constantly moving, again a reinforcement of his earlier hedge on the lack of time to be still and introspective. Third stanza, fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the men gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Here the poet introduces the impact of such behavior. The poet then proceeds to ask the reader to ponder, consider, and bask on the glory of this rare occurrence, where the usual flurry of diverse human activity is now silenced to a standstill and in surprising unity. As humans are perceived to be unique in their own ways and possess free will, a compiled, deliberate silence of all shall create this mysterious yet wonderfully unusual unanimity. Here the poem develops by providing what ensues, though his quietness. The poet shows how, because of this, humans would now have more time to think about their actions and how they would have the time to notice the details that surrounds their daily lives, knowing the power they have over nature, but also being aware of where they stand. Humans now demonstrate their free will not to harm nature. Mentioning about the men gathering salt, who notices that his very hands are hurt, displays the result of retrospection. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. In this part, the poet references wars and those that participate in it to drive his point home, because there is now a time to breathe in and out without being required to do what is usually done or blindly follow orders. there will also be time of introspection. And through this, humans are now able to see how in a war there really are no winners. This is where he continues to show the critical impact of allowing time of introspection, a conscious effort not to contribute or be part of decisions. Another symbolism can be spotted when the poet mentions put on clean clothes. This is not just to emphasize how with war there is the shedding of blood, but rather the very act of putting on new clothes can be seen as taking on a different role, a different persona, and basically having a different take on the matter of means their hands. What I want should be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no trucks with death. If we were not so single minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and to the threatening ourselves with death. The poet then divulges to clarify that his plea for stillness, for a moment's pause, is not to be mistaken for the mere act of doing nothing or death. He mentions a truly look as life as it is, which is of living while experiencing the beauty of quietness and the moments that go through it. Note how he used no truck with death, means definitely, which is an idiom meant to connote and not having association with. The poet considers going through the hustles and bustles of without pausing as death. The poet then proceeds to give the reader a conditional statement to allow him to consider what would happen if humans had not been slaves to time, routine, and habit. He presents the bearing this unforeseen single iota of change rubbing off on the majority of people would ultimately result to a much needed introspection. The poet further injects irony when he mentions death in this stanza again as he goes to show how humans are terrified of eventually dying. This while not noticing that the life they are actually living is merely existing, without truly being aware of what they are doing and becoming. Also, the poet asks us to learn from earth, which seems to be still when seen from far away, but is bustling with life with all the flora and fauna with it. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. Having presented the dilemma, the poet effectively passes the baton to the reader and finally has now given him the power and the choice to be still and begin his own introspection and retrospection. As with the central idea of this poem, the call to pause and be mindful of one's own self and ways resonates to the very conclusion of the poem. Now let's begin with the summary of the poem. Keeping Quiet summary discusses peace, humanity, and brotherhood. This poem is by the author Pablo Neruda. The poem is explosive as well as quiet at the same time. Neruda speaks as the world is of wisdom in a calm fashion. Neruda believes that staunch activism is not the best way to get into the heart and minds of the masses. Consequently, the author speaks with much serenity. Furthermore, this serenity creates an aftermath of thoughts ripples in the minds of readers. The poet wants the reader to take time out of their busy lives of retrospection and introspection. The poem is symbolic of stopping all activities and understanding the purpose of the world. Keeping quiet appeals to the heart of the readers in contrast to the intellect. And finally, through this poem, Neruda aims to get his reader thinking and pondering as opposed to intellectual stimulation. Now, students, here I finishes with the poem Keeping Quiet. I hope the poem is clear. So, thanks for watching my video. Thank you.